Hello and welcome to the Cambrian Virtual Show from the 29th of May, 22nd of May to the 29th of May. We'll be delivering on average 3 speakers a day. Today is a very busy day. We're having 5 speakers. We've had 2 this morning already from Sigma and Olympus, absolutely brilliant. And also later on today, some more lives coming. If you want to see some of our pre-existing videos that we've done, you can re-watch them through our website, which is cambrianphoto.co.uk, and you can also see all the people that are coming up in future for this show as well. So you can go onto the website, or you can follow the link that's in the description and also just posted into the comments. We're also happy to announce that all of the virtual talks that we're doing are for free on both our platforms, Facebook and YouTube, so you can watch them for absolutely free. Because of this, we are asking for donations, which will be going to chosen charities and local food banks. You can find the link for to donate on our main website. Thank you very much. Yeah, lovely. Some lovely comments coming in. So let us know that you're there and watching live with us. Give us a hello. It's lovely to have you all with us today. And super happy to announce our guest today. Absolute brilliant wildlife photographer. Give her a warm welcome into the comments. Tesni Ward, everyone. Hello, Tesni.
Hi, how you doing?
Nice little woof wave there. I liked it. Yeah, I was half expecting you to appear on the screen, like as we practiced in the that was it.
There we go. Yeah.
Some lovely comments in. Keep the comments coming. Let us know that you're actually there. We love to know. Me and Tesni were just speaking just before we went live. It is eerily silent at our end. So we're used to hearing people sort of with their comments and stuff. So if you can put them actually in the comments, though we can't audibly hear you, we can certainly see your comments coming through. So it's lovely to see and know that you're watching here with us. So yes, Tesni, you've been all right. You've been keeping sane.
No. No, I have not. Although many would argue I wasn't sane before lockdown, so this has just made things worse.
Okay.
But everything's good.
Yeah. You've still been managed to sort of keep your hand in a little bit, at least, haven't you? With sort of doing stuff like this and sort of getting out a little bit as and when you can, haven't you?
Yeah, I was out for the first time with the camera yesterday. Didn't see or photograph anything, but first day it doesn't often go to plan. So the weather's supposed to be pretty good for the next week or so. So I'm hoping I can get out a little bit more and get some stuff. That's
brilliant. I can see you've got a little friend in the background there.
I have no idea what you're on about.
No idea. Okay.
Nope.
Oh, that's brilliant. So yeah, you've prepared a nice little talk for us today, haven't you, Tesni? So very much looking forward to hearing it. So without further ado, I'll hand you over, Tesni, and have fun.
I'll try. Hi everybody. Thank you for joining my virtual talk with Cambrian Photography today. So for anyone who doesn't know, I'm Tesni. I've been working as a full-time wildlife photographer for about 4.5 years now. And I'm based just on the outskirts of the Peak District. So I'm very lucky to live in such an amazing place. I am also an Olympus shooter. Been doing that for about 4 years as well. If anyone has any questions at any point throughout the presentation about camera settings, stories, anything whatsoever, just pop it in the comments and I will happily answer things when I do get the chance. So, as some people may know, I used to be a Canon shooter. I shot with Canon for maybe 5 or so years. And then when I became full-time, I was very fortunate that Olympus did approach me and say, here's some kit. Do you want to try it? Now, I'd invested so much money in my kit at the time that I'd never considered switching over to something new. But in the end, I thought, it's a free trial. What's the harm? Let's give it a go. So my start with the system was pretty rocky. I didn't get on with it as well as I had hoped. It was the EM1 Mark 1. But when the Mark 2 came out and they addressed some of the things that I had a little bit of difficulty with, I was able to really get rolling with the kit and start really having some fun with it as well. Now, when it comes to wildlife photography, sometimes people say there is no luck. It is down to you as the photographer, and you just put the work in and things happen. Whereas in reality, there's always going to be a little bit of luck that's involved. So on this particular day, I was running a landscape workshop, and we were walking down a country lane where I've never seen any animals or wildlife whatsoever. When I see this peacock displaying on a farm courtyard, naturally, I got very excited. I was very fortunate that the client really wanted to photograph this guy as well. So we set up on the edge of the courtyard, waiting with the cameras, and we didn't take a single picture for about 45 minutes because the entire time he was displaying behind a barbecue, and we simply didn't have that flexibility to move around it. But luckily, the farmer did eventually come along and said, feel free to go onto the courtyard, take your pictures, have fun. We thought, problem solved. We can move around the barbecue, we can get our shots. He spent another 45 minutes wiggling his backside at us. And this is because he was displaying to a garden ornament white rabbit that was about 3 foot tall. But eventually a female did come along. He actually turned around and we think, great, we can actually get these photos now. But we have a massive white blob of her neck between him and us. But she moved on pretty quickly. She wasn't really impressed or interested in him. And that gave us a few opportunities to get some images before he went back to his garden rabbit ornament. And this is another example where luck was a little bit on my side. Now, I was working in a hide. Don't usually do that, but sometimes it's nice to mix it up. And this perch usually had the woodpecker coming in. And then there was this beautiful male. But he usually was coming in and landing behind the post. We can only see the sides of him. There was no snow or fantastic weather forecast. It was just supposed to be a dull day. So when massive snowflakes started falling from the sky, all of a sudden it added more depth and atmosphere to the image. And I was very lucky that at the same time, the male actually came and landed on the side of the perch. So I was able to get a few images. Another thing that I really enjoyed doing with the system, because it's got a short minimal focal distance, I can get quite close to macro results without having to get too close myself. So one of the things that lockdown has stopped me from doing this year is working with adders and lizards in the Peak District. Because usually from March, April, sometimes into May, I would try and spend some time with these guys. So this particular image was taken with an equivalent focal length of 840 millimeters. And I am exactly 1.4 meters away. So I was basically just sat there, not moving, waiting for the snakes to come out to bask, firing away. And then eventually when they were the right temperature, they were obviously moving on to get on with their day. Now, another thing that I don't work with too much is black and white or monochrome. I really do love these kinds of photos, but for me personally, I haven't found my niche yet. I've not found whether monochrome works for my style or not. But occasionally I will take images where I think that they will work much better in black and white in comparison to color. And one thing that I usually try and avoid on days like today, when it's very, very bright blue skies, usually I won't be taking images because it can be very harsh. It washes out color, contrast. This gorgeous female eider, she was actually stood in the shade, and behind her it was all sun bleached because obviously that wasn't in the shade. So it allowed me to be able to get slightly high key images, making the most of non-optimal photography conditions. And another thing that I often hear from people who either want to start wildlife photography or have started and are struggling, people often think that you need a very long lens to be able to work with animals and wildlife. But as long as you choose your subject appropriately, this isn't the case. So having worked with red squirrels in Yorkshire and in Scotland as well, over time, I've done plenty of work with a long telephoto lens, but I realized that these guys are pretty comfortable with people being around when they've gotten used to them and been habituated. So this was taken with a 7 to 14mm lens. And there's me thinking, no problem, you know, I should be able to get everything that I need as long as I get a well-behaved squirrel. But again, wildlife knows that you're there to photograph them and they want to make it as difficult as possible. So even with my longest lens, it still simply was not long, my shortest lens, widest lens, it wasn't wide enough. And these squirrels ended up just climbing all over my camera. It was an absolute nightmare. And all I could do was get my phone out of my pocket and start taking pictures, just to try and make the most of the experience that I was having. Another thing that I'm really missing due to lockdown is working with coastal birds, working on the coast. So usually from April onwards, I would spend as much time as possible at several locations across the UK, trying to photograph gannets, puffins, guillemots, all of the incredible birds that you can find there. And what I often do, because I'm a little bit tight on money, I like to save it as much as I can to go on big trips. I usually sleep in my car, which means that I can get up at the crack of dawn and be able to get out and get the best light and the best conditions. So I'm pretty gutted that I've missed this year, but hopefully things will start to return to normal over the next few months. And 2021, maybe I'll be able to get back out there. But one thing that I very much I'm still guilty of it, but was much more guilty in the past, is I would always want to fill the frame. I love working with portraits of wildlife. I like to try and show their personality and their characteristics, but it doesn't tell the whole story. So often what I do now is I will leave the long lens in the car or at home, and I will set out with shorter lenses. And my goal is try and push the boundaries, try and work with different styles of images. So this was taken on a boat trip off the coast of Flamborough, Yorkshire Coast Nature. They are really great if you ever want to do this. And I was the complete idiot hanging over the side of the boat with the wide angle lens on, trying to get water level images. And my punishment for it was the camera got drenched more than once. Absolute nightmare to try and keep it dry. But I was happy to be able to get some quite nice images from that sequence. And this is another example of, if you know your subject and you choose it appropriately, you can use a wide angle lens. So Arctic terns, they nest on islands such as the Farne Islands, but they choose to put their nests directly on the footpath, which is a little bit of a nightmare when you are trying to just get past, because they are going to try and peck you to death. Often they get very, very excited at the start, and then they do start to calm down when they realize that the people are not there to hurt them. But you can get some pretty awesome shots with a wide angle lens if you're working in this sort of situation. But there are some things that you need to keep an eye out for. So obviously they do peck, and it does feel a little bit like a fountain pen being dropped on your head. But if they fail to deter you with their bill, they have a second line of defense, and it's not very pleasant. So they will drop guano, bird poo, directly onto your face and your camera if you are not careful. And that little line on the top of the image is not cloud. Unfortunately, that is bird poo. And this happens every single year that I'm on the islands and I'm working with them. Because of past experience, I know to always take kitchen roll, baby wipes, and I always have a filter on the front of the lens. Firstly, to protect it in case it gets scratched, because if they catch your lens at the right angle, there is a risk of a surface scratch. But also, when this does eventually happen, it's pretty traumatic trying to get it clean. It just ends up smudging and it makes it worse, not better. So I just take the filter off, and that gives me more time to be able to be out there shooting and not having to clean my camera and lens. And one of the challenges with certain locations is you can't get there at the best light. So what I usually try and do is I'll try and make sure that I am there when it's cloudy, overcast, or just sort of haze high up in the atmosphere, so it acts as a softbox. And you can really get some great stuff if you are able to find the right angles. This particular image was taken with the 40 to 150. I really, really enjoy going onto islands like Skomer Islands off the coast of Wales. Unfortunately, I don't think I'm going to be able to do that this year either. But every time I go, usually I am cursed with a band of cloud across the horizon where the sun is due to set. So I often don't get the light that I'm out for. But again, there are plenty of opportunities to work with on the islands. So this puffin was just nestled down on the path, just having a nap. I popped my shorter lens on and I simply sat and waited for him to open his eye. And it's incredible to see the detail in their eyes, because from a distance, it just looks pretty plain. But they actually have some incredible squiggles and lines and some amazing detail. Now, this is taken with the 2x converter on the 300mm. A couple of people have asked me to point out images taken with that 2x. Now, again, this was taken in non-optimal light conditions, so it was quite bright. And because puffins are black and white, it can be very difficult to get the exposure correct. This juvenile, he's probably about 3 to 4 years old. He had popped himself on a cliff, and his background was completely in shade. So what I was able to do is underexpose quite significantly. It's still bright enough to be able to pick out the puffin, but it completely blacked out the background. It was really fun to be able to photograph him as he was displaying to absolutely nobody, because there were no other puffins interested, unfortunately. But one of the challenges when you're a full-time wildlife photographer is you don't actually get that much time to take your own pictures. So most of the time, if I'm on these islands, I'm teaching other people, I'm guiding other people, and that means that I'm focused on them getting their best pictures, not on me. So last year I decided I can't keep going and not getting anything for myself. So I dedicated a couple of days where I just go onto the islands and focus on my own work. And one of the things that I really wanted to get was a puffin in flight. Now, I had plenty of shots of puffins in flight, but I'm very, very picky on the sorts of shapes and styles that I want to achieve. So I was really hoping to get a puffin either landing or taking off. So you've got the feet, the landing strips that are out, and hopefully some really nice shape in the wings as well. Now, this particular puffin was really not having a great time trying to get into his burrow. Because of the gulls and other birds in the vicinity, he kept circling and circling and circling 25 plus times to try and land in his burrow. And that gave me a great opportunity to, again, keep following him, tracking him, and hopefully getting the shots. But every time I thought that I had it, I realized I didn't, because there were people with bright coats in the background that was very, very distracting. So I was very, very happy when I was reviewing at the end of the day to realize I did have a couple where it had nailed it and there was nobody distracting in the background. But when I changed system, it did change my style of shooting. So often when I'd be working with the common lizards, I would be using a macro lens, usually about a 60mm macro, up to a 105 macro. But the problem with this is you have to be very, very close to the subject, and you get quite a shallow depth of field as well. So when I found this lovely female, she was at the bottom of a fence post, and in front of her was a lot of grass. Now, I was looking at this and thinking there's still the potential to work here if I can find a corridor to shoot through, because that grass will act as a natural frame. It will add some depth and some color. And I was extremely grateful that when I did find a corridor, she actually looked over her shoulder at me. This is something that lizards don't do very often. They pretty much sunbathe and then they are gone for the day. You're probably not going to see them much. So again, luck was on my side on this occasion. Now, let's, in the comments, let's see how many people are interested in going out and photographing widgeons. Now, for me, where I'm based, I have not been able to find any widgeons whatsoever within about an hour's radius, which is extremely frustrating. But these birds are absolutely beautiful. And when I do find sites that have them, I will try and spend a hell of a lot of time working with them. I was very, very fortunate that this particular chap is about an hour's drive away. He is a nightmare to try and capture because he's usually right at the other side of the lake. But eventually he did come along and I was able to get some reasonably nice pictures. But one of the things that we are guilty of in the UK and across the world as well is we are very good at overlooking species that we deem to be too common or easy to find. So things like mute swans, you're probably going to know of several locations in your vicinity where you can go and work with these birds. And when I say I'm going on a mute swan photography day, I'm going to go and try and work on my portfolio, people usually tend to want more rare, extravagant animals. But just because they're easy to find does not mean they're easy to photograph. And often they end up being on the opposite side of the lake or far too close. So again, I'll have two cameras, one with a short lens, one with a longer lens. So hopefully I can get two birds with one stone, pardon the pun. And it's often quite important to try and work locally if you can, because if you're having to travel an hour, 2 hours every single time you want to go and photograph something, it's going to be very difficult to be able to find that time, justify the time, and sometimes it just becomes very difficult to be motivated to keep going. Now, this particular reservoir is about 5-minute drive from where I live. And if you looked at it at face value, it is appalling. The water is full of rubbish. It's surrounded by industrial buildings, houses. But I found that for a couple of months each year, the sun rises directly aligned with the reservoir. And as long as I shoot down a specific corridor, the background is not a problem. So I'll literally be there first thing in the morning, trying to scoop out any rubbish from the water. I don't want random blobs just floating into my image. And then I simply wait for a bird to move into that corridor where it's nice and clean and hopefully good light as well. Ruth asked, am I in the water with the widgeons and swans? No, I'm not. I can be. I do have waders, and for certain locations, I do get into the water. But because I have the articulated screen, usually I'm hanging over the bank, and I'll either have a tripod in the water, so the camera is literally just above the water level, or I'll be hand holding as well. So for these particular shots, no, I'm not in the water, thankfully. And we're going down the list on things that people are not always as interested in when it comes to photography. So Canada geese, again, you can probably find these guys in many locations, but often they're not on the top of the hit list for photographers to go out and work with. Now, this particular image was taken essentially at night, and I'd realized that a street light was reflected off the water and created this kind of T shape. I thought this would be actually great if I could get a bird to line up with that light and hopefully get a good picture. So this image was taken ISO 3200. The shutter speed was a 15th of a second, and my aperture was f2.8. So the lighting conditions really were not ideal. And it took a week of going every single night to get one bird to actually behave. Canada geese, they move a hell of a lot. They never stop, whether they're talking, just moving their head, or physically moving themselves. So I was really, really grateful when I eventually got a bird that would do what I wanted it to. Now, unfortunately, this particular site where I work with mallards has been damaged quite heavily from flooding that we had over the winter. But aside from mountain hares, which are my main winter project, mallards are one of the other main subjects that I work with. And again, mallards are heavily overlooked. Again, they're very, very common. You probably find them at pretty much most lakes, ponds, rivers. But the more time I've spent with them, I've started to realize how incredible these birds are. They have so much charisma, they have so much personality, and you don't realize this until you spend some time with them. And yes, they may be common, but again, that does not mean it is easy for you to get slightly unique, slightly different images. At the end of the day, it doesn't matter what's in front of your camera. It's how you perceive it and how you capture it in your images. And with mallards, I will be doing this project for a few years. I'm hoping that the site that's been flooded will recover. But obviously, there are plenty of places to work with mallards. And again, I'm always trying to push the boundaries, try and do something a little bit new with them. And there are several images where, you know, I'm still trying to get them, but I haven't yet been able to. So fingers crossed, I will get them eventually. And this is another example of using non-optimal conditions to your benefit. So again, this is probably about 1 o'clock in the afternoon or midday. And I noticed that at this location, the light still hit part of the river, but one of the walls was completely in shade. So again, by underexposing quite significantly, because the sun was so light, this beautiful hen mallard was still standing out like a sore thumb. But with the shaded background, plus the underexposure, I was able to essentially black everything out. So it just isolated her on the water. Now, if there's one subject that's probably never considered for photography, it's pigeons. So often people are calling pigeons flying rats, street rats. There's all sorts of names for them. But I thought to myself, what's wrong with a pigeon? You know, it's still wildlife, it's still an animal. Although technically, I'm pretty sure these birds are owned by somebody. So again, I popped on the wide angle lens, headed to a local town centre where I knew there were plenty of pigeons. And again, I was just trying to work with them, photograph them, and show that they do actually have some personality. They do actually have some worth when it comes to photography. Now, if you think of a site like Flickr, think of something like a pine marten or a pigeon. So a pine marten is a lot more difficult to find. They are a lot more elusive. They have a much more restricted range as well. Whereas pigeons, you can find them everywhere. But if you look on, like I say, Flickr, pine marten has more results than pigeons. Again, because people overlook them. But doesn't that give every single wildlife photographer an opportunity to capture unique images that haven't been captured of pigeons before because people are overlooking them? So I challenge everybody watching to try and get out with a camera and see if you can get some images of mallards, geese, pigeons, rats, gulls. Thanks, Roy. Gulls are also great to work with. So usually black-headed gulls, you should be able to find them pretty much at most ponds. They can be great for practicing with your birds in flight, doing artistic things like slow shutter speeds as they're flying, and also just general shots. So get out there with the common species and you'll find that they really, really do have worth in photography. But as I mentioned, my main winter project is usually mountain hares. Now, I'm very, very fortunate that I live on the border of the Peak District, and the Peak District is home to the only English population of mountain hares. I absolutely love these guys. They are amazing to work with, but they are also an absolute nightmare. So they are nocturnal. They're active at night, not during the day, but they don't live in burrows. They don't live underground. They live in little indentations called forms above ground. So that means that you can still find them during the day. They're just a lot less active. Because they live in quite harsh conditions, it can be pretty tricky to try and outlast them. Now, I often argue it's more important to understand your subject, understand the animal, body language, behavior, than it is to understand the intricacies of photography and your camera. And this is because if you can read how that animal is feeling within reason, if you can get a general understanding of where they're going to be, what they get up to, then this is going to increase your chances of being able to photograph and capture great images of them. So I'm usually looking for unique individuals who show signs that they are more comfortable with people than others. And this particular hare was called Beardy. He was named by a photographer called Andy because he has a Santa Claus beard that's kind of down his chest. He was an incredible subject, really, really wonderful to work with, very comfortable around people as long as you approached him in the right way. So I spent a few days working with him using longer lenses. There were other photographers working with him too, so he had plenty of interaction and engagement with people to see that we weren't a threat. And after some time, I felt like it was the right time to get a little bit closer. So I started with a 300mm, and then I moved to a 40 to 150, and in the end, I had a 12 to 40mm lens on. And I was photographing him as he was getting up to get ready for the evening. And it had been pouring it down with rain, miserable weather. I was drenched to the bone. But thankfully, when that eventually passed, he started getting more active and got up. And there was a nice rainbow in the background as well. But unfortunately, he'd positioned himself in a little bit of a ditch, so I couldn't quite get the angle that I was hoping for. And this other wonderful hare was called Mrs. Grey. And this hare is probably the most photographed hare in Scotland, because she was very, very unique. She was so comfortable with people that she was deemed to be bomb-proof. You could get away with practically murder around her. Unfortunately, hares only live for average 2 to 4 years in the wild, and she did pass away a couple of winters ago. But she will always be very fond. Everybody will always be very fond of her, given the amazing experiences that people were privileged enough to experience with her. And this is another shot of her. Now, mountain hares turn white in winter because it's supposed to be a form of camouflage to help them hide from predators. But as temperatures are increasing year on year and we see less and less snow, it seems that more hares are turning less white and more grey or silver. Now, this might be because of several different factors, but on the first year that I saw Mrs. Grey, again with a couple of other photographers, she was the only darker grey hare in that area, and that's how she ended up with the name. But then the following years, more and more darker individuals were starting to pop up. So while she was still the darkest of them, it was clear that there was definitely a shift in terms of the coat colour. And personally, I've noticed this in the Peak District and also in Scotland. So there's a slight concern that if conditions keep changing and the weather keeps getting warmer and warmer each year, we may stop being able to see mountain hares turning white. So for snowshoe hares in the US, some of them have stopped changing white completely. They stay brown year round now. And there is a genuine concern that that could also happen here. And that would be very, very sad if that does happen, because these guys haven't changed much since the last ice age. And they're definitely very iconic of the uplands in the Peak District and in Scotland. The star at the moment up in Scotland is a hare called Lady. Now, this hare is, again, very, very special. And unfortunately, Lady is actually a male. We gave him a name and was pretty sure it was a female. And then I had left, gone back home. The other photographers were still up in Scotland, and I get a message, Lady's not a lady. But unfortunately, the name had stuck. So even though Lady is a male, Lady will always be known as Lady. Thankfully, he doesn't seem to mind too much. Unfortunately, I didn't get up to Scotland this year, but I am hoping and praying that he survives until next year so that I can hopefully get up there and work with him once more. Now, I had been meaning to go to Lake Kikini in Greece for several years. And every year, when the time came to start booking it, I would either get other things in the way, so I didn't have the time, or I would think, you know, I can just do it next year. And it's kept going on year. And I just thought, I can't keep doing this. I have to actually get out there. So I went out for a week with another photography friend. And I thought 1 week is plenty of time to get different light conditions, hopefully get a wide range of images. We were treated to a week of fog and cloud, which was a little bit frustrating, but in hindsight, it actually allowed us to get some pretty awesome images because that fog blanked out the background, so it was essentially white. And there are a few hundred Dalmatian pelicans on the lake, and most of them look very, very similar. Now, for me, I'm usually looking for the unique individuals, the ones that stand out a little bit from the crowd. So with this particular guy, you can see he has a damaged pupil. Again, I just thought, oh, that's quite beautiful. That's quite unique. I really want to try and capture that in an image. And again, I'm usually the idiot who's hanging over the side of the boat trying to get those water level images. So I use the articulated screen a lot so I can get as low as possible. Again, just trying to get more habitat environmental shots at a nice eye level. But although there's probably about 400 or 500 Dalmatian pelicans, there's only a handful of these guys. So these are called great white pelicans. And I recognize that there's some irony there, seeing as he's pink. So another name for these guys is a rosy pelican, and that's because during the breeding season, their plumage changes to this gorgeous pink. They get a little bit of an orange chest, and the color that just pops from their bill and their plumage is amazing. But because there's only a few of these guys, they often get bullied by the Dalmatian pelicans, and that makes me feel sorry for them and makes me more eager to work with them. So again, I really wanted just to try and capture general portraits of these beautiful birds. But because there's so many other birds, it was really, really difficult to isolate them because there'd constantly be birds in the foreground, in the background, tail tips, bills. It was a nightmare just to get a solo great white pelican. And thankfully, when I did, the water was quite still as well. So it was nice and mill pondy. And you can see here, this is another example of looking for unique individuals. So this was an image that I'd had in mind before I got out there. Again, I really love working with portraiture of different wildlife. And you can see again, this chap has a very unique eye. He's got black flakes in it. And again, it looks like there's some damage to the pupil. So for me, instantly, I was drawn to him and I focused solely on him. Now, this was taken with a 2x converter again on the 300mm. And this is something that I'd wanted the previous year when I went to Greece. I went back again last year, but it was an absolute nightmare because every time I thought I had the shot, I would have cut off the little pink bit on above his eye, or I just didn't quite get the angle that I was trying to achieve. Now, the reason I was trying to get this guy, again, I mentioned that they get bullied quite often. And you might think that their bill is very solid. It looks quite well built, but it's actually very, very delicate. So you can see there's actually blood and scabs along his bill at the start of the bill, in front of the eye, and also on his pouch. And again, I just really wanted to try and show some of that detail in the image. But when I went out to Greece, naturally I was going out there for the pelicans because I knew that they were out there. But I thought to myself, Greece is a big place. There must be more to photograph out there than just these guys. So when I wasn't on the lake, I was driving around, exploring, trying to find something new. I'm driving down this little dirt track road. There's kind of a ditch that goes down to a river on the left-hand side. And I see something fluffy on the riverbank. Slam the brakes on and I screamed, "Oh my God, it's a beaver." It definitely wasn't a beaver. So I was looking around thinking, this habitat's wrong. It's just not right. There's 7 of them. They don't look right. The tail is wrong. What on earth am I looking at? So I went onto Google and I typed in rodent-like beaver Greece. And the first thing that came up was koipu. To which my response was, what on earth is a koipu? It turns out these are one of the most amazing animals that I've ever had the privilege of working with. By far, they are one of the top 3 in the world, just because of how much personality these guys have. So they are not native to Greece. They are native to South America. Unfortunately, they were introduced into many places across the world due to the fur trade. And they do a lot of ecological damage. Fortunately, at this site, it didn't look like there was too much going on. Obviously, I have no idea of what it used to look like before they were there, but there was a wide variety of different species on the river and on the lake. But just spending time with these guys was incredible. So I'd have to crawl around about 40 to 50 meters over quagmire to try and get to the water's edge. It really wasn't very pleasant. It smelt. It was just not nice. But again, I wanted to try and get those water level images. Excuse me. And in the background, there were reeds. So the light reflecting off the reeds onto the water made this beautiful golden color. But it wasn't until last year when I went back that I actually got some sunlight to work with. So again, I was there for a week. And over that course of a week, I had one sunset that I could work with. Again, I was lying on the edge of the river where these koipu were. The light was incredible. I genuinely have not touched the light on the color on this image. I'm sat there and naturally there is nothing in front of me and I haven't seen a koipu for some time. I'm just thinking, I don't care what goes in front of my lens. Please give me something so that I can make the most of this color and this light. And like it was scheduled to happen, this gorgeous male swam out from beside me, straight in front of me. And again, I was able to make the most of the situation. This is another 2x converter image with the 300mm. But I really do try and make the most of having that longer lens to be able to work with stuff a little bit closer. Now, I was in Uganda for this particular image, and we'd broken down in the middle of Kampala. So in the middle of the city, there's not much to photograph. It was pure dumb luck that we broke down next to a wall that had a male and female rokogama on. And this male was displaying. They display by doing push-ups, so it was quite funny to watch. And again, I'm just leaning on the car with my long lens, firing away as he was doing his stuff, strutting his stuff. And I was actually really, really happy to get the opportunity, because usually when you're on safari, when you want to drive, you'll still see lizards and reptiles, but they're often a little bit too far off the road or path for you to be able to get up close. So this was a right place, right time, even though we didn't plan on the car breaking down for over half a day. Now, ironically, in February, I was actually in Japan, and luckily came back with nothing. But it was an incredible week out there. If anybody has been thinking of going to Japan, once everything settles down and it's safe, I highly recommend visiting this place. So we weren't out there specifically for photography, but we did have a few days where we were able to get out with the camera for a couple of hours. And this particular morning by far was the standout day. It was incredible, the conditions. So to put it into perspective, we're on a lake that's completely frozen. It was blowing a hooey. It was really, really gusty and windy. And the temperature was around about -15 degrees Celsius. So frankly, it sucked. It was not pleasant conditions. But the snow kept coming and going. And when the swans eventually came in, it was just incredible. It was so much fun to work with them, even though I couldn't feel my fingers for about 3 hours after the experience. And again, I was experimenting with all sorts of different styles. I was trying to photograph them landing, taking off, flying, on the ground, in the hot springs. And it was so much fun. We were only on the lake for, it was around about 2 hours. But in those 2 hours, the changes in the conditions and the light was stunning. And it really gave a good opportunity to get a wide variety of images. So this particular whooper swan was trying to land on the hot springs that was absolutely full of swans already. So it was quite fun trying to isolate him and keep the focus on him as he was coming in to land. Ruth has asked about the 2x teleconverter and if I think there's any degradation in image quality. If you use the 2x in good light, and on subjects that are not too erratic. So I definitely wouldn't recommend it on something like a flying puffin. But if you use it in good light on the correct subjects, yes, there is a little bit of image degradation the further away the subject is. And it also depends on things like atmospheric distortion as well. The 1.4 for me shows no image degradation. And I can do birds in flight as well. The autofocus is snappy. So that puffin in flight was taken with the 1.4 on the 300mm. I would not use the 2x for birds in flight personally, because yes, it does slow down your autofocus slightly. And yes, it does degrade the image slightly. But again, as long as you do it in good light, in good conditions, and you choose the time to use it, you can still achieve tack sharp images. So I'll never leave the house without the 2x on. I don't use it super often, but I'm extremely grateful when I can use it, because it really does make a difference. So this particular image was taken with the 300mm, the 2x converter, and it was actually, I think this was taken at 3200 ISO, so it was quite dark. There were other photographers on the lake, and also I don't want to get too close to the swans anyway. I don't want to disturb them. So rather than shuffling closer, I just popped the 2x on, and I was able to get some nice portraits of this individual as the snow was falling again. Again, I was really, really happy with the results. Even though the light was definitely not the usual conditions I would use the 2x in, luckily on this occasion, it did outperform my expectations. Now, when it comes to wildlife, with certain species, you can Google it. So you can pop onto Google and say Puffin Locations UK, and you get like a long list of places you can go. As long as the boats run and you go at the right time of the year, you're guaranteed to see a puffin. But with certain species, it's a little bit more tricky than that. So again, I've mentioned it before, I'll mention it again. Understanding the actual subject, understanding the wildlife, the signs they leave behind, really can improve your photography, because it's going to increase your chances of finding them and therefore being able to capture some images. So I spent a lot of time trying to develop my fieldcraft, develop my tracking, develop my understanding of these animals so that it could hopefully improve my photography. But a lot of it was done because I was after one particular species, and that is badgers. Now, many people who know my work will probably know that I am the person who works a lot with badgers. These animals are incredible. They are my absolute world. But when I initially found them, it was only supposed to be a year's project. So I'd never seen a live badger. I was absolutely desperate just to see one, let alone photograph them. It's now 4 and a bit, 5 years on, and I'm still working with badgers extensively. They are amazing. And I think one of the reasons I'm so attracted to them is because of how misunderstood they are. Excuse me. So over the years, I have spent so much time at this one set that I've been able to develop a family trait. You might notice that 2019 is missing. That's because I didn't get enough time with them last year to be able to identify the individual cubs. They're very, very difficult to differentiate in the first 6 to 8 months until they start to develop their personality and they start to develop differences in things like the shape of the head, the tail, and also markings on their face. So I'm hoping that I can add the 2019 cubs in this year, but unfortunately, because I've only just been able to visit them yesterday, it's going to be very, very tricky to work with them this year because they've not seen me for so long. So I saw a badger bum shuffling off into the bushes yesterday. That's a great start, but hopefully things will improve and I will be able to start working with them again. And these guys are genuinely, they are so important to me. Again, every individual has a name. They have their own unique personality. This particular badger was called Bear, given the fact that he had a massive head and he looked like a teddy bear to me. Absolutely amazing animals. And because I've worked so much at this site, it's becoming extremely difficult to be able to get different angles, different images. So what I'll usually be doing, I'll have a medium length lens on, a 40 to 150 usually, with or without the 1.4 converter. And then I'll have a second camera that I'm controlling with my iPad. This will be using a wide angle lens, and it will be positioned in such a way that I either can't see it with my own eye from where I'm sat, or it's just an angle that I can't physically do myself without disturbing them. So I'll set everything up, I'll get the composition right, obviously connect the camera to the iPad, and then from here I can control everything. Settings, I can control the focus, how many images it takes. So it gives me that flexibility that I otherwise didn't usually have. And I usually do put a little camouflage neck gaiter around the camera just to help it blend in. But if I'm brutally honest, I really don't need to, because they really do not care about the camera being there. It's a silent shutter, so it doesn't make any noises. They will be able to hear the mechanical noises in the camera because they have incredible hearing, but it doesn't bother them too much. And usually it doesn't bother them too much to the point where I actually start to worry, because they get very close. You get lots of shots that didn't quite go to plan, and they'll also knock and bump it over quite often. So I'll be sat there looking on the iPad, seeing it roll down the hill, praying that it doesn't get damaged or broken, and also praying that they don't end up taking it into the set, because I'm not getting it back once it's in there. But sometimes it does work out. And again, I can get those really close, intimate images without upsetting them. Badgers are very timid, they are very shy, but they're also very, very curious. So once they are comfortable with it, they will give it a good sniff, a good check out. Sometimes they'll give it a good nibble, which isn't quite as exciting to watch. But again, it really helps just to increase what I'm able to do in a single visit. 2 birds, 1 stone. And I'm really, really hoping that I do get to work with them this year as well. Although The first visit yesterday definitely did not go to plan. Now, this particular badger was called Lissa, and Lissa was very, very special. She was always a much more bold, adventurous cub compared to her siblings. And she was the very first badger to ever approach me where I was sitting. So from that day on, when she brought her 3 siblings to my feet and started sniffing my tripod, my bag, my leg, I was hooked. And this badger was so, so special. Now, there's a lot of information out there in terms of badger ecology, badger behavior, how the social structure works. One of the things that's quite difficult to assess is what age do the cubs leave the set? So I have personally found that it varies from location to location. The normal statistics that are quoted are 6 to 12 months. The cubs will leave, go to a new set or family, and hopefully make a lovely new clan of their own. But with these guys, the cubs do not leave until they are 2 years old. So I'm very, very privileged to be able to watch them from when they are a little bundle of fluff that trips over their own feet into an incredible adult badger. And they do live in a woodland. It is quite dark, and badgers, again, are nocturnal. So I only work with them towards sunset. Luckily, these guys do come out when it's still a little bit light. But for some of the shots that I want, I need them to stay still. And unfortunately, they don't seem to do this until the sun's gone. So something as simple as this, all I wanted was an image of a badger's nose. A badger's nose is very, very important to them. This is how they navigate the world. This is how they find food, sniff out earthworms under the ground. And you've got the incredible sort of hexagonal shapes on them, a little bit like a dog. So all I wanted was a photo of the nose, but they would never ever stay still long enough when it was lighter conditions. So this was taken at 3200 ISO, and it was a 15th of a second shutter speed. Not ideal in any way, shape or form. I don't have to worry about my physical movement because the image stabilization takes care of that. I have to worry about the badger's movement. And eventually I was able to get a couple where they hadn't moved mid-exposure, and I was very lucky to get one that was quite symmetrical as well. So I was very happy with that. Now, Luna is the main badger at the set. She is the dominant so, and she is probably the main reason why I've been able to work with them so extensively. It got to the point where she would leave her cubs quite close to me, and then she would just scurry off into the woods, still within view, but just leaving her cubs a few meters from me was always an amazing privilege. But Luna is very unique. She has cataracts in both eyes, so she can't see very well. She's very, very fluffy. She's got an excess amount of fur, and she's got distinctive markings that tell me instantly that that's her. But because she's pretty blind, when she emerges from the set, she will freeze in place, trying to smell and hear her surroundings to make sure it's safe. So again, this was taken with non-optimal light conditions. The sun was literally just about to set, but as you can see, the light does not reach most of the woodland. It's only hitting a couple of the trees at the top. So this was another one that was taken at a slow shutter speed, but because I knew her, I knew what she was most likely to do, I knew I would be able to get away with a slow shutter speed with her. If a cub or a yearling had come out, not a chance, they never stop. So this was a combination of a little bit of luck that it was her that came out, and also knowing her behavior that helped me to capture the image. But of all the time I've spent with badgers, and I've spent a lot of time with badgers, this is probably the image I'm most happy with so far from the sequence. Badgers are prolific groomers. They like to stay clean. They don't like parasites. And it's also a form of social bonding. They can't scratch and itch every part of their body. They need their friends and family to help them reach those areas. But one thing that they will do every single day is have a really good self-groom. So they usually pop themselves on their backside, they'll stick their legs out, and they start scratching away, looking a little bit special. They enjoy it so much that you'll see them licking the air. They just absolutely love it, and it must feel good. But every time that they would do this, it would be bad light, behind a badger, behind a bush, behind a tree, behind a hill. I never was able to capture the image that I wanted. This is Lissa when she was about 1.5 years old, so she's grown up at this point. And I knew that she groomed every single time she came out of the set. So every day, oh, here's Lissa, she's going to go and groom somewhere. But again, she'd usually do it behind a bush. And I'm sat there thinking, come on, please, give me something here. Eventually, she did it in a good spot with reasonable light. Again, it wasn't perfect. This is using a slightly slower shutter speed of a 50th. But knowing her and knowing how she usually grooms, she goes crazy and then she just kind of stops and slumps. The moment she stopped, I was able to get a selection of images before she started going wild again. So I was really, really grateful to be able to get this image, because it's taken a long time and it's definitely still not as good as I would like it to be. So there's still work to be done, but I'm happy with it for now. So I'm going to finish the talk with a short video. I'm a photographer. This is how I make a living. But since I switched system and video became so much more accessible, I really enjoyed experimenting with both styles. It's really nice just to have that fluidity to switch from video to stills with a lever. So all of this is handheld manual focus, anywhere from 14mm to, I think there's 840mm clips in here. And they're just a few bits and bobs over the past couple of years. So I hope you enjoy it and I hope it works. So thank you ever so much for everybody attending my online talk today. There are a couple of questions that have been asked that I'm more than happy to answer. And of course, if you have any other questions at all, pop them in the comments. Paul, how much time do I have for questions?
You can have as much time as you want. So the stage is yours. While you're just having a look through those comments, Tesni, and we can pick some out together as well. Just like to say, obviously on our behalf and all the people that are watching as well, thank you so much for sharing those wonderful images and those brilliant stories that came along with them as well. So it's an absolute pleasure to see your work, and that video was lovely as well. Just to sit back and relax and watch too. Absolutely lovely.
Thank you.
So let's have a look at some of the comments that we've got in here. Yeah, thank you very much for answering some as we went along as well. So we had a couple from Ruth, which were absolutely brilliant. Lots of comments today, flicking through them. Yeah, just looking generally through the comments, lots of big thank yous and hellos from all over the UK, which is lovely to see. Let's have a look.
We've got one from Roy. Let's have a look.
I've lost the questions. If anyone has answered the question, just repost it at the bottom so we can get to it quicker. That'll be absolutely brilliant. So
I can read out Roy's. I've got Roy Jenkins Packer in front of me. So as someone new into animal photography, what basic equipment would you suggest? And when out in the field, what equipment such as clothing should you take with you? So when it comes to, if you're just starting out and you don't actually have a camera yet, the best thing that I can advise is get yourself into a camera store when you're allowed to get yourself back into a camera store to actually get your hands on them and have a feel. Like, get to Cambrian photography. But no, it's really, really good to obviously get out and get a feel for the camera, because every camera's built slightly differently. Some are larger, some are smaller. You might find that one just works a little bit better for you than others. So I advise, if you're just starting out, don't invest thousands and thousands in massive lenses and equipment. Get yourself a basic camera, so something like a Olympus EM5, and get yourself a couple of kit lenses that cover anywhere from 12 to about 300-400 millimeters of focal length, because that's going to give you some flexibility, and it's going to give you the opportunity to really experiment with your style, get out to things like your local lakes with your mallards, your mute swans, your geese, and just have a play. You don't need super, super fancy equipment when you're starting out, because you're still going to be finding your feet. So just get something flexible. Maybe something like a 75 to 300 mil lens is great, because you're covering a lot of bases, and get out there and have fun. In terms of what to wear when you're out in the field, it really does depend on you as an individual and also the animal that you're going out to photograph. So I always, always, always have waterproof trousers on, because I am constantly sitting, lying and crawling in disgusting conditions. So waterproof trousers means that I can just wipe them off and carry on. And they're also quiet ones. You can get waterproof ones that are extremely rustly. I have quiet, they're crag hopper ones. So they're nice and quiet, they don't make too much noise. It's up to you if you want to wear things like camouflage. For most subjects, if I'm honest, it's not necessary. Things like foxes and hares are a little bit different. But if you're working with your local birds on the pond, you definitely don't need waterproof camouflage stuff, sorry. Just make sure you're comfortable. And also don't wear too many perfumed things as well, because again, animals have great sense of smell, and they are going to smell you, and it might make it more difficult to work with them. We've got one from Phil Barker.
Brilliant tips. Yes, I can see that. So still shoot Canon. I have an EM1. Still a bit noisy in low light. Are there sort of versions that are better? It is expensive to run two systems as well that we can see. We have had some people sort of in the comments as well that have actually got things like an EM1X and an EM1 Mark III, have been saying that as the models sort of come up and the newer models, the low light level performance is a lot better. I mean, is this something that you agree with, Tesni?
Absolutely. So I mentioned at the start of the talk that I wasn't happy with the Mark I, and one of the key things I was not happy with was the low light performance and the high ISO. I genuinely did not want to go above 800, and I was very upset if I had to. They addressed that with the Mark II. I would say there were small noticeable improvements in the Mark III and the EM1X, but it's going to be a mass, like you're going to notice a difference from that Mark I, regardless of whether you go to a Mark II, III, or the EM1X. So it's definitely better.
Yeah, yeah, and obviously the nice thing about the Olympus system as well is the small and compactness of it as well, which makes it a lovely little system to sort of carry around with. It means that potentially you can take more kit out with you, so you can have those wide angle lenses as well as those telephoto lenses with you to get ultimately different shots if you needed them, opposed to just taking maybe a full frame camera where you could only really carry that big sort of lens with you. So carrying sort of more kit with you does help when it's smaller and lighter. Let's see if we've had anything at the bottom here.
Ruth asked about Japan. February, Hokkaido, which is currently locked down, so winter's really good for that.
Got here one from Terry. How do you close? Oh, hold on. Is that on screen?
Yeah.
It's not showing my end. Oh, sorry. How close do you try and get to your subjects?
It's a difficult question because it depends on so many different factors. So it depends on the kind of shot I'm trying to capture, whether that animal will be comfortable with me getting close in the first place. So if I'm working with an animal that's very nervous around people, doesn't want you very close, I'm just going to pop a long lens on and respect its space. Whereas if you're working with something that's more comfortable with it, such as certain individuals like Beardy, Mrs. Grey, the mountain hares, or mute swans, birds, mallards, you can get pretty darn close and they're not going to mind. So I get as close as they are comfortable with. And, I will have images in mind where I might need to be closer or further away. But if it doesn't look like that particular animal will be happy with it, I'll simply go and find another one that's more comfortable with it, because I don't want to disturb or upset them too much.
No, that's brilliant. Comment from Neil there. He's used Topaz D noise, works wonders on the EM1 Mark II. Definitely agree there. Tesni, one from Brandon here. Do you know any areas around London that are good for photographing various animals? Depends if you've been there, probably.
I go to London once a year. I know that a lot of the parks have very fat grey squirrels in because they get fed a lot. So again, you can go to most parks. You'll find swans, mallards, coots, all sorts. You'll usually find there's a lot of urban foxes around London as well. And then you've got places like Richmond Park, Bushy Park, which have deer in as well. That is the extent of my knowledge, I'm afraid, because I've not really had the opportunity to work in London.
Yeah, ultimately it comes down to knowing your area as well, and knowing what you're actually taking of. So there's no replacement for getting out there, learning your local sort of wildlife in your area, and build up that relationship that Tesni has, like with her badgers as well. So and just practice. That always helps. Another one from Ruth. Ruth, popular question on here. It's lovely. Do you, I'm guessing, subscribe to baiting animals to come out food? So do you sort of bait out?
So it is a controversial subject within wildlife photography, and people are very split. So some people are like, it's fine, and some people are like, it's not fine, not even feeding garden birds, for example. I sit in the middle, so I think that there are certain occasions where it is okay to bait animals. I don't personally agree with live baiting, but for example, if you want to bring, I've been trying to feed the garden birds to bring them in to do some garden photography, because we don't really get many birds around here. So I think that it's a personal preference. You need to recognize that feeding them will potentially change their behavior and therefore change the kind of images you can capture. And you also need to be very careful that you don't feed them to a point where they become dependent on you. Because obviously if you stop visiting or if you move away and they've depended on you for their main source of food, that's going to be a huge problem. So yeah. I think it's down to the individual on what they feel comfortable with. As long as you are careful that you don't, push it too far or throw a live rabbit out for a fox or, things like that.
Yeah.
But, if you are careful about how you do it and if it doesn't harm the animal, then personally, I don't see a problem with it.
No, that's brilliant. Just probably got time for just another quick more. Howard, we've got, do you prefer shooting with tripod or handheld?
I do use tripods if I'm going to be sat in the same place for a long time and I need the camera to, for example, if I'm doing foxes, me lifting my camera could be the thing that scares them away. So if I'm going to be sat just chilling for a while, I'll use a tripod. But usually I prefer to handhold because I want that flexibility to be able to move, get different angles. And when you have to start fumbling with a tripod, you're potentially missing out on the action.
That's brilliant. And we'll end on this one as well. So camera would you choose? So over the EM1X or the EM1 Mark III? Tricky one, that one.
EM1X. It's not.
Oh, there you
EM1X.
go. Nope, there we go.
Yeah. For me, it fits my hand perfectly. It feels like it's molded to my hand. All of the buttons lie exactly where my fingers naturally sit. So for me, it feels like my own personalized camera. I'm just so comfortable using it. I do like the EM1 Mark III, but it's smaller. And going from the EM1X to the EM1 Mark III, my hands struggle. So I usually use the EM1 Mark III as my second shooter that I'm controlling with an iPad.
Brilliant. And that sort of goes back to, I was going to say that's the last one, but I'm going to have to put this one in here as well. So it's what's the name of the badger on the sofa?
He doesn't have a name. I'm open to suggestions.
Oh, there we go. It could be named first here today.
Could be named.
Oh, that's absolutely brilliant. Tesni, thank you ever so much for sharing with us. It's been an absolute pleasure here to have you on our Cambrian virtual show. Please, everyone in the comments, give big thank yous there. We'd love to see some nice big thank yous coming through for Tesni. So thank you very, very much for that. Tesni, I'll just pop you back into the green room and I'll speak to you after the live. Thank you very much for coming.
Thank you, guys.
Bye-bye. That's absolutely wonderful there. And such an amazing array of images as well. And just seeing Tesni's work is truly inspirational. So big thank yous to her for attending today. What have we got next on today? It's what happens when we do 5 in a day, I forget. Yes, so later on today, we have Photospeed coming up at 4 o'clock. Who'll be doing a print presentation and diving into the dark arts of color calibration. So very looking forward to seeing that later on. And then this evening we have the lovely Candid World of Kevin Mullins. So that's going to be another awesome speaker later on this evening. Big thank you again to Tesni, and thank you everyone for commenting live. It's always most appreciated. If you're watching this video after the fact, so rewatching, you can still you can still comment, and if there's still any questions, just pop them down in there. We'll get them answered as quick as we possibly can. And also, if you can please like and follow our Facebook and YouTube pages, it'll be most appreciated, so we can spread the word of this wonderful show that we're doing for you. That's it for me for the moment, and we'll hopefully see you later on at 4 o'clock. Cheerio. Bye bye.